Hello, I am Erin Soule, and this project was completed in collaboration with Madeleine Burland. Before I get started, I wanted to provide some background information that was important to the development of this project. I'm currently a senior majoring in biology with a minor in psychology, and after graduation, I plan on pursuing a career in genetic counseling. If you're unaware of what genetic counseling is, this is the process by which you evaluate and understand a family's risk of inheriting a medical condition, and then you help them navigate any issues that might arise because of their diagnosis. An essential part of this is one's ability to translate complex genetic concepts into terminology and ideas that those who do not have a background in genetics can comprehend and digest. For this project, I not only wanted to pursue a project that challenged me academically, but I wanted to commit myself to something that embodied the pillars of genetic counseling. However, I wanted to take this one step further. If genetic counselors can break down genetics to adults, and in some cases even older children who have no background in genetics, can this be effectively done through a children's book? And can this be done in a way that not only benefits those affected with the disorder, but can it educate those who are not? So without further ado, we would like to present to you Genetics with Nettie and Friends, an exploration of genetics in children's literature. Overall, there were three main goals that I wanted to aim to complete by the end of this project. The first being, I wanted to create a children's picture book on simple chromosomal disorders, resulting in self-publication. I wanted this book to then demonstrate and describe basic genetic concepts at a level at which children with little or no genetic background can understand. And I wanted to collaborate with a student illustrator, who in this case ended up being Madeleine Burland. Madeleine was actually recommended to me by my faculty advisor, Amanda Renesnick. Madeleine had previously taken one of Amanda's classes, and when I met with her and she showed me some of her previous art styles, it just kind of seemed like something right off the bat that was going to work and produce a really cohesive and strong project. It also helped that Madeleine was equally as passionate about this as I was, and from then we got started. This project started back in January of 2019. We started off doing a lot of research. I spent probably January to June doing just solely research before I even started trying to brainstorm ideas of how I wanted this book to look and work. It was really important that because I'm a biology major and I do not have any background in early childhood education or children's literature, that I understood what it meant to write a children's book, and I understood the ins and outs of the construction process, why things are made a certain way, why things are formatted a certain way, so that way this book was the best version it could be. I did a lot of research on disability representation within literature. It was important that I understood not only how to write for a population that I was not a part of, but portray these communities in a positive light. The last thing you want to do when you're talking about a community that you aren't a part of is imply anything negative about them. You don't want to misrepresent these individuals in any capacity. I also did a lot of research in the cognitive and empathetic development in children. This was really important because this was a lot of the foundations for why things are written certain ways in children's literature. I also did a lot of research in genetic disorders. It was important that I picked the right disorders for this book to be properly represented. I researched kind of what makes children's books, why are they certain ages, what that kind of means. I knew I wanted to write a children's book, so it was important that I understood the age range that I was writing for and what that entailed, so that way my text could be properly simplified for the readers. While this entire research stage was going on, I also selected my illustrator, who ended up being Madeleine. And I also narrowed down the disorders that I wanted to include in this book, which ended up being Down syndrome, Williams syndrome, and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Starting in August is where like more of the physical construction started. Madeleine and I talked about a book format. Originally we decided on a 6x9, but that really didn't work because of some last minute formatting issues. So the book ended up being 8.5 by 11 in a landscape format and ended up being 35 pages in length. Once that was set, I got started on developing the text. At this point, because over the summer, I kind of developed what I wanted the plot to look like, what I wanted the setting to be, and all of that background that I needed to write the text. So I spent a good portion of the first part of the fall semester constructing my text. While this was going on, I was getting it approved by my advisors, and I was passing it on to Madeleine so that way she was able to start illustrating. The next and final steps were text formatting. Once Madeleine's illustrations were all done and my text was finalized, the next thing to do was put those two together. This was done using Adobe Illustrator and InDesign in both the Collab Lab and the Architecture Studio. This took a lot more work than I thought. I am not familiar with either of those programs, but luckily I had a friend who was and was able to help me with that. And then the final stage was publication, and this ended up being done with Barnes & Noble Press, so this book is actually for sale on Barnes & Noble's website. Overall, there are 3 different types of genetic disorders. There are monogenetic disorders, which is the result of a single defective gene, and an example of this would be sickle cell anemia. There are polygenetic disorders, which is a mutation in more than one gene, and this is something that lifestyle and environment can also play a role in the expression and development of. So an example of this would be diabetes. And then there are chromosomal disorders. This is where chromosomes, or part of chromosomes, are missing or changed. And this is what people normally think of when somebody says genetic disorder. When you kind of say that phrase, the first thing that pops in a lot of people's head is Down syndrome, just because that is the most common. And this was something that I really had to think about when I was doing my research and getting into the selection phase. Originally, I had wanted to do monogenetic disorders because they are simpler than the other 2. But that being said, a lot of the time, because of the recognition that comes with genetic disorders, the individuals who have chromosomal disorders are the ones who tend to be ostracized, discriminated against, or made fun of because of their condition. You can't really tell if somebody has sickle cell anemia or not. So while genetically it was a less complex and would probably have been much easier to write about, it was not going to have that social justice element that I was looking for. The purpose of this book was to normalize these disorders and make children understand that individuals can be different, but that doesn't mean you need to treat them differently. So it was important that I focused on a group that tends to receive that kind of attention, but could also be visually represented in the book. Like I said, somebody who has sickle cell anemia looks no different than somebody who does not. But there are certain facial characteristics or cues that go along with specific genetic chromosomal disorders that can signal somebody out. And I wanted to normalize those aspects, which is why I ended up selecting chromosomal disorders to be the focus of this book. Signs and symptoms associated with trisomy 21 can include decreased or poor muscle tone, short neck, developmental delay, delayed language and speech development, a groove between the first and second toes, and a characteristic sparkle in the eyes. A lot of these signs and symptoms were incorporated into Madeleine's illustrations, but in terms of text content, I wanted to pick something that was going to educate children, but not villainize or ostracize or alienate those who have Down syndrome. Because of this, I didn't really want to focus on developmental delay, and I decided to focus on the decreased or poor muscle tone. I was worried that within the text, mentioning the developmental delay could insert incorrect preconceptions about individuals with Down syndrome into these children's minds, and that was the total opposite of what I wanted to accomplish with this book. With a decreased or poor muscle tone, there is a stigma associated that individuals with Down syndrome cannot compete in sporting events. Obviously, because of the health effects, they do need to be careful, but that doesn't mean they can't participate. So I decided to link Luna to soccer. This was something that was going to empower this aspect of decreased or poor muscle tone, but also it is something that children with Down syndrome do. They are just like any other kid. They like running around. They like playing soccer. And this is an example of the Oxford Bulls. These are children with Down syndrome who are in Ireland, and they are fighting for the right to compete in soccer matches because they enjoy it. It's something they're passionate about. Anchoring this disorder to soccer is also something that's helpful psychologically, which I'll discuss later on in the presentation. But all of us have probably played soccer at least once in our life. If you talk to pretty much anyone, they probably mentioned that they played soccer when they were like 7. I guess it's just something that most people do. So by anchoring it to something that is very, very widely considered to be a quote-unquote normal thing to do, this normalizes the disorder. When a children will read the book, they will see, oh, hey, that kid's playing soccer. I like soccer. I like them. Which is kind of the whole goal of the book. We want to explain the genetics, but we also want to normalize the disorder so that these children who are reading these books, when they encounter somebody with one of these disorders, they are friendly, they are nice, and they aren't looking at this person like they are some other thing than themselves. The next disorder that I selected to be in this book is Williams syndrome. This is a bit rarer than Down syndrome as it occurs in 1 in 7,500 people, but this is caused by a microdeletion of 26 to 28 genes located at 7q11.23, as you can see in the image to the right. It's currently thought that a deletion in the elastin gene is what causes majority of the signs and symptoms associated with this disorder. I chose this for multiple reasons. The first reason I chose this is because it is a bit more rare. It occurs in 1 in 7,500 people. That's pretty rare. But I also chose it because genetically it is a different type of chromosomal disorder in comparison to Down syndrome. Down syndrome was a whole extra copy of another chromosome, whereas Williams syndrome occurs because a section of one copy of a chromosome is deleted. I wanted to cover this because it gets in some genetic diversity as well as diversity of representation between the disorders. The third and final disorder that I chose to focus on in this book is Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is a rare genetic disorder, but it affects 1 in 3,500 male births worldwide. It is X-linked recessive, and it is thought to be caused by a deletion in the dystrophin gene. The dystrophin gene is located at XP21, and it measures approximately 2,100 kilobases in length, and this is the largest known human gene. And the mutation can occur at any point in this gene, and it can be any length to cause an expression of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So, because this is X-linked, there are some biological aspects of it that are a bit more complicated. So, when something is X-linked, there are different ways that it can be expressed. Obviously, males only have one X, whereas females have two X's. So, in nature, our body balances this out through dosage compensation. There can be either the upregulation of X-linked genes in males, the downregulation of each of the X chromosomes in females, or more commonly, the complete inactivation of one of the two X chromosomes in females. Because it is X-linked in terms of pattern inheritance, a female would need to gain 2 copies of the mutated gene to develop Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This was kind of like a really hard thought process for me because I wanted the main character in this book to be a little girl scientist. As a woman in STEM, I wanted to represent women in STEM to young readers. I wanted them to see somebody that could just put a hint in their mind that, hey, I'm a girl, I like science, this is something that I can do. That being said, that kind of complicated things when I wanted her disorder to be Duchenne muscular dystrophy, as it mostly occurs in males. That being said, it can occur in females. Their father just has to have it, and their mother needs to be a carrier for it. This would complicated the text writing a little bit, as it did make things a bit more complex and created a text-heavy spot within the book, but it was something that I really just felt needed to be done. So I stuck to my guns and I went with my initial plan and made the main character for this section be female.
Hi, my name is Madeleine Burland, and I am the illustrator for this book, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my process of designing and drawing the illustrations. The first step I did was the character designs. I needed to get a feel for what the characters were going to look like, what their personalities would be, how they were going to act. So I did a couple sketches of each of them to try to get a feel for that. The first character I did was Luna, and she has Down syndrome, so it was really important to look at reference pictures of people with Down syndrome to try to get a feel for how their facial features are shaped, like the almond shape of their eyes, the bigger cheeks, that sort of thing. I also drew Luna in a soccer uniform since she loves soccer, so I looked at some pictures of the U.S. women's soccer team and drew some of the designs for their uniforms. And I also looked at the poses of them shooting goals, that sort of thing, to get a feel for how Luna would look when she was actually playing soccer. And then I drew her a couple more times, just in cute outfits, looking like a normal kid. The next character I designed was Nettie, and she's based off an actual geneticist. So she's wearing a lab coat, she likes science. She also has muscular dystrophy and a service dog to help her with that, so I drew her in a wheelchair and with her service dog. I designed a golden retriever for her service dog originally, but we decided to go with Erin's dog Starla as the actual service dog, so golden retriever didn't make the cut into the final book, but Starla's still pretty cute. The final character I designed was Miguel, and he has Williams syndrome. So again, like with Luna, I looked at the different facial features. People with Williams syndrome tend to have a really big smile, so that was important. I also don't understand negative social cues, so Miguel is pretty much smiling and happy for the entire book. He's also a musical prodigy, as people with Williams syndrome tend to be. So I practiced drawing him playing a couple different musical instruments because musical instruments are a little harder to draw, so I wanted to get a good feel for how he would look playing them before drawing him in the actual book. The next part we did was the storyboards, and this we did together as like a collaboration because I wanted to make sure that when I planned out the story, Erin knew kind of how it was going to look and could give feedback since it is her book. The storyboards were really important. They give you a sense of what the story is going to look like, maybe where some text is going to go, how the pictures are going to play out so that you can really see the format of the story before you start getting into the really detailed drawings and actually like doing the real drawings. So we went step by step. As you can see, the pictures are drawn very quickly. They're not shown with a lot of detail, just enough guidance that I could do the full pages when the time came. This is an example of a concept drawing that I did based on the storyboard. So this was the storyboard of page 1 and then a lower quality drawing I did to get a feel for the environments in the book, the colors of the book, and how the characters are going to be in that environment. I also put in a lot of Easter eggs, which Erin and I talked about while making the storyboards. Especially in this page, there are a good number of them, including one of my favorites, a poster of Bill Nye over on the left-hand side. This drawing was just to give me and Erin an idea of what the finished pages would look like. And a lot of changes did end up being made to this page in the final copy, which we'll see in one of the later slides. The first thing I do when I'm drawing the illustrations is I start with the pencil drawings. So these are 2 scanned pictures of some of the pencil drawings from the original book. I did all the pencil drawings first. I didn't even touch the pages with a pen or a marker because I wanted to make sure that Erin liked the drawings and approved of them, basically. And it turned out to be a good thing. Some of the pages did have to be changed. In these 2, for instance, we did make some changes to accommodate the text. There were too many details in the background, too much, like not enough space to fit all the words that needed to be in there. These pages are also an example of some that were changed, but these were changed from the original storyboard. So as I was going through the drawings, drawing out all the pages, the storyboard just didn't really make sense for the direction of the book and the complexity of the text especially. Because Erin wanted to really describe how muscular dystrophy works for these pages, it was necessary to have a page that was almost entirely text with only the one little picture. I also wanted to include a more detailed drawing of Nettie with her parents, and the little bubbles showing the different scenes that Erin's talking about of Nettie with her service dog and how the service dog helps. This was also where we were able to include more of the bubbles with the double helix around the edge that kind of carry on throughout the book and tie it together a little bit more. After the pencil stage is the inking and coloring, so that's where I outline all the pencil marks that I made in ink, usually a micron pen, and then I have to erase all the pencil, and then I color it in. I used all Copic markers for this project, trying to blend them in some places, but mostly I kept the colors pretty separate to give it a more graphic look. I tried to use a lot of bright colors, things that looked good together but were happier, a little more childlike. So here's a picture of the front cover, and then the last step we did was scanning in all the images and adding the digital details. So you can see in the bottom left the digital image of the front cover with the title on it and the names of the author and illustrator. These are two sample pages from the final book with the digital details added to them. The one on the left is the page 1 that I had initially done a concept drawing for. Some of the things did change in this one. For instance, the color of the wall is yellow instead of blue to kind of brighten it up a little bit more. There are also some more details on the chalkboard behind Nettie, so it's a little more interesting to look at. The page on the right is one of the ones that we had to change, so we took the drawings off of the chalkboard in this one and added the text there. You can also see some of the background characters in this page, trying to make them more diverse, and then there are a number of Easter eggs in this page too. The posters on the back wall are posters of some of the musicals I like. The kids play instruments that I've played, that Erin's played, that my family members have played, just kind of adding in the personal touches that make the book a little more fun for me and Erin. And these are two more pages from the final copy of the book. They're the last two pages in the book, and they're some of my favorites because of just how normal the kids look in this one. We spend the whole book talking about the genetic disorders that they have, how they're maybe different from regular kids, so to speak, but in this page you really can just see them being normal, playing with a soccer ball, throwing grass on each other. I remember always doing that with my friends, hanging from trees, and just all the kids in the background kind of hanging out together and playing with the service dog in the end. I just really wanted to show that despite all their differences, they're not so different, as the book says, and they're just kids, and they still like to have fun. So that is it for me. I really enjoyed illustrating this book. I had a lot of fun with the characters, with the backgrounds, making them as bright and fun and kid-like as possible. Overall, it was a really great experience.
Final completed form of this project did have some major differences from my original proposal. As I mentioned way early on in the presentation, I originally wanted to focus on monogenetic disorders, but after I did more research, I ended up choosing chromosomal disorders as the focal point of this book. Originally as well, because I was very naive about what makes children's book work and how you really make them in the first place, I wanted this to be a collection of short stories. However, because of the page limits associated with children's literature, one plot with subsections is what ended up making the most sense and ended up being what is in the final project. Initially as well, I wanted to have a very genetics-heavy introduction. However, when I was writing, it ended up being something that was a little bit too hard to take in and was kind of boring right off the bat. So I simplified the content and added a genetics-heavy back matter with basic concepts in the introduction. This allows teachers and parents who are reading this book to read the back matter, gain more insight into information, and be able to answer their children's questions. When Madeleine and I originally talked about this project, we kind of entertained the idea of having the characters have neutral gray skin tones. This was to eliminate the need for racial representation within the book to solely focus on genetic diversity. However, when we thought about it more, we were kind of thinking, okay, children are probably going to be like, why are these people gray? People aren't gray. So instead, we decided to just make sure the characters in the book all had a very diverse skin tone. Originally, as well, throughout the flow of the text, I wanted to have bolded terms with definitions in the glossary. This didn't end up happening because once the text was written out, I was able to simplify things enough where there were very few words that were going to need to be defined because they couldn't really be simplified anymore without losing scientific integrity. In my proposal as well, I outlined that we would be publishing with Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing. That did not happen, and instead the book is published and for sale with Barnes & Noble. One of the biggest surprises that I encountered was vocabulary limitations. I honestly thought it was going to be harder to simplify the concepts down because of what the concepts were. However, that wasn't really the case. A lot of the difficulty came from the vocabulary that we use and what is accepted in science. A lot of the words that I was taught genetics with, I can't use to explain these concepts to children because they imply a negative connotation to somebody who doesn't know the definition of the word. So I couldn't use words like mutation, faulty, error, mistake, or anything similar because it was going to imply that there was something wrong with this child versus, you know, making it something that's empowering for individuals with these disorders. I think I ended up saying that DNA gets scrambled in the book, and that was the only thing I could really come up with that didn't have that implied negative connotation. This was really eye-opening from a science perspective because you don't really think of any of these things meaning, it's bad or it's wrong or this person is villainous or alienated or whatever. But that was the hardest part of the entire process because I had things simplified down, but then when somebody else read it, they were like, this seems negative. This makes me think this about the character, and I shouldn't really be thinking that when the goal of your book is to encourage empathy. In the end, this project does have a lot of strengths. The relationship between the text and illustrations is, in my opinion, amazing. Obviously, I'm a little biased because I did work on this project, but Madeleine's art styles did a fantastic job at balancing out really heavy text material. Unfortunately, because this is having to be online instead of in person, I'm not able to show you the book because it is a physical book, not an ebook, but the style that Madeleine illustrated in did so well at keeping the attention of the reader as well as balancing out some of the heavier things that were discussed in the book. I feel that something that would have been more rendered or more realistic would not have had the same effect as this book does, and honestly, I'm really proud of how it ended up turning out. I do feel also another strength is the simplicity of the concepts within the book. I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to do a good enough job of simplifying these concepts, but I did it, and I think it's something that actually turned out really well, and people are able to read and understand what's going on even if they don't have a background in genetics. I'm also really proud of the in-depth genetic explanation that's in the back matter. I feel like this is something that's going to be really empowering to parents or teachers who might not otherwise have this information in genetics, because now if a reader or their child or a student asks a question, the parents have a resource right there that they're going to be able to read and hopefully answer these questions the children might have. I also included resources for parents and teachers in the back of the book as well, to some of the more popular organizations that advocate on the behalf of individuals with Down syndrome, Williams syndrome, and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I felt this was important because it kind of gives a starting point if parents and their children or teachers and their students want to get more information together and learn about these disorders in a more in-depth manner, and or even how they could get involved with these individuals in their community. I wanted to thank everyone who helped and had played a major role in the development of this project. Everyone from Dr. Funtemart's lab was incredibly helpful. They offered a lot of really great and constructive feedback in the construction of not only this presentation, but the construction of the overall book. As I received things from Madeleine and I put things together, I would show it to them at lab meetings, and they would offer really great feedback into how we could make the book even better. I also want to thank Amanda because she connected me to Madeleine in the first place, and she was my go-to person for editing. She was the one who approved the final copy of the text and really encouraged me to pursue this project and that this was something that I could do. Joe Prince was incredibly helpful during the research stage of this process. He is so knowledgeable in children's literature, and he connected me with so many amazing resources that really helped build a strong foundation for this book. Obviously, Madeleine was a huge help. This book would not have been able to come to fruition without her art, and I'm so glad that we were able to work together. I had a lot of help from my friends. My friend Jacob helped me, learn how to use InDesign and Illustrator to add text onto the book, and Evan and Brady were really helpful in preparing this presentation and making sure everything made sense, as well as reading my text and making sure that it was something that was simplified enough and was able to make sense to somebody who doesn't have a background in genetics. I did also want to extend a very large thank you to the Center of Undergraduate Research and Scholarship. Without this grant, this project would not have been able to become a physical book. It was needed so much. It helped us buy all of the art supplies that Madeleine needed to construct this book, as well as I was able to actually get some copies that I was able to donate to schools in the area and from my hometown. Without this grant, this book would still just be an idea and not something that is real. So I thank you so much for providing Madeleine and I with this opportunity to make something amazing.